Welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in once again. We got another great video for you guys. But before we get into the content of this video, if you haven't already, please like this video, share the channel out, and subscribe to the channel. So today's video, we're going to be getting into some Moorish history that I just came across, and it was very interesting to me because Moorish Americans, I have yet to hear a Moorish American teach this part of Moorish history. Now, Moorish Americans, they make the claim to be Moors. They make the claim to be connected to the medieval Moors. Now, in all actuality, a Moorish American is none other than an African American, a black man. Now, they choose not to subscribe to calling themselves black, and they choose not to call themselves African Americans. They rather go by the term Moors because they love and want to identify and connect themselves with the medieval Moors that invaded Spain. Now, we know when the colonizers went over to Africa, they were snatching up a bunch of Africans. They displaced them and casted them off into slavery. So, therefore, Moorish Americans, African Americans, they don't really know their history. They don't really know what people in Africa they really belong to. But this particular group that likes to identify themselves as Moorish Americans, they want to connect themselves with medieval Moors because in actuality they're suffering from post-traumatic slave syndrome. They really don't know who their forefathers are. So they just cherry-picked the Moors because they like the history. They like the story of their history. They like the fact that these Moors were conquerors. They weren't submissive. They went and conquered Spain and ruled Spain for almost 800 years. So they're like, hey, yeah, I want to be a part of that. So I'm going to call myself a Moor. There's some problems with that, and we're going to get into some of these issues because I've ran across some very interesting Moorish history that these Moorish Americans do not teach. So what we're looking at here is a passage that I came across while I was doing my studies. So let's read what it says. The Malaki Garretts, according to Garrett scholar Vassou de Jing, were not only expert genealogists of the Mandinka lineages, they were masters of the histories and genealogies of other ethnic groups within the empire. The Fula, Sononki, Sonari, Moors, Wolof, Bambara, Kasononki, Senufu, and Sharif lineages of the Arab Berbers, of the Afro-Arabs. Moreover, Malikian historians effectively influenced the historians of those nations who adopted Maliki methods and styles of discourse. Garrett memorization of kinship relations allows them to map the movements, migrations, and branching into new or other ethnicities in the country of Mali. So this is pretty much talking about the West Coast, West Africa, the Mali Empire. So as you can see, they're naming different ethnicities of African people that were in the Mali Empire. We have the Fulu, Sononki, Sonari, we have Moors, Wolof, Bambara, Kinsoki Sanufu. So my question is to Moorish Americans: how do you just cherry pick and call yourself Moors when you really don't know who you come from? Look at these other ethnic groups. How do you know you're not one of these other ethnic groups? How do you know that you're a Moor? There were probably thousands of ethnicities, of ethnic groups of Africans. So how do you just cherry pick these Moorish people and say, hey, yeah, I come from that, when there's no way you really know that you come from these people? What is your proof? When people of other races connect themselves to their forefathers, they connect themselves through traditions and religions and just the culture itself. So where is your proof that you are connected to these Moors? I have yet to see any Moorish American show how they are connected to the Moors. Now, I just want to take a look at some meanings. Ethnicity. Now, plural, ethnicities. Ethnic group. An ethnic group, a social group that shares a common and distinctive culture, religion, language, or the like. So, Moorish Americans, you say that you are these people Moors. Now, like I said, you see other ethnicities out there. So you say you're a Moor. So how could you say that when we look at what ethnicity means, right? You don't share the same culture as them. You don't share the same religion as the Moors. And you don't share the same language. You speak English. They speak Arabic. You guys are Muslims, and which is not a real, that's something that was introduced in the early 1920s. And the Moors, the historical Moors, were Muslims. Their God was Allah. Their prophet was Muhammad. You guys don't subscribe to that. So, just off looking at the definition of ethnicities, there's no connection between you, Moorish Americans, and the Moors, the medieval Moors from Africa. Now let's take a look at the definition of culture. Culture, noun, way of life. The way of life, especially the general customs and beliefs of a particular group of people at a particular time. Now, you don't share the same way of life as those Moors on the continent of Africa. So how could you just cherry pick from all these different ethnicities and say, hey, yes, I'm a Moor? When, look, there's 1, 2, well, Mandinga is 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's 8 other ethnicities just in this little passage that I pulled. So how do you cherry pick and say, hey, yes, I'm a Moor. My forefathers were Moors. Well, if your forefathers were Moors, then you would have the same customs and religious practices and share the same languages as the Moors that you're saying you come from. But you can't show anything that ties you to these people. So it's all a farce.
And Tony Parker 151, did the Moors buy slaves? I don't really know how to answer that question. When you say the Moors, what do you mean? But when you say, did the Moors buy slaves, as if it was the thing, you know what I mean? Every Moor, all right, we going, I can't agree to that. I'm not really sure where that's even coming from. But when you say, did the Moors buy slaves, as if it was the thing, you know what I mean? Every Moor, all right, we going, I can't agree to that. I'm not really sure where that's even coming from.
Now, as you can see, this Moorish American, Rami Salam El, he knew nothing about Moorish slavery, yet he's running around calling himself a Moor. He said, I don't know where that question is coming from. Well, Rami, I'm about to show you. Let's move forward. Let's move forward. Okay, we're just going to start here. This consensual interpopulation by the Mandi Intelligista was precipitated in part by a furious reaction to Soninke taunts that the Mandi had been their slaves. Indeed, the Kakolo, from whom most of the Mandinka descended, were vassals of the powerful Soninke, who the Mandinka called Marka. They who hold the power, a name which describes the power relations in the ancient Sahel. Mandinka captives were sold to Soninke and Moorish merchants in frequently large numbers just before the formation of the Mali Empire, and the Mandinka did not want to be reminded of their subjugation. So this was the part that I was speaking of in the beginning of the video. Moorish Americans, they don't teach that the Moors that they say they descend from partook in slaving Africans. They were enslaving and buying other slaves from other African groups. Why don't you guys teach this? Why would you want to connect yourself with a people that destroyed your people? You just cherry pick. This is what happens when you don't do the full research on who you claim you want to be. Now, we know African Americans, they were transported to the Americas by the Europeans in the Atlantic slave trade. And you guys were part of that, which is why you're in the United States, because if the Atlantic slave trade never happened, then more than likely you would still be on the continent of Africa. So being that you don't know who your real forefathers are, you cherry pick and say, hey, I want to be related to these Moorish people, not even knowing that these Moorish people participated and bought slaves. Why don't you guys teach that? Mandinka captives were sold to Soninke and Moorish merchants. So these Mandinkas, they were going around, they were waging war on other people, and then they were selling their captives to the Moors. The Moors were buying slaves. The Moors participated in the enslavement of Africans. Yet these are the people you want to say you descend from, and you have no proof that you even descend from these people. So your claims are utterly ridiculous. Let's keep going. Rather than being a consummate tyrant and villain, Samungoro Kente is depicted as a scarred despot with a vision and mission to abolish slavery and the slave trade in the Mandi that was so rampant, it was depopulated. It was depopulating the Mandi region. A lucrative slave trade was controlled by Soninke traders who bought Mandinka slaves in exchange for horses or salt, and then sold them to other Soninke and Moors. Once again, we see that the Moors were buying slaves. And you want to say that you descend from these Moors. This is not good. The Moors were buying slaves. So you guys were shipped over here, just like all the rest of the African Americans shipped over here in the transatlantic slave trade. So pretty much you enslaved yourself and sent yourself over here, the history doesn't add up. As we can see, the Moors were buying slaves. Mandinka slaves in exchange for horses or salt, and then sold them to other Soninke and Moors. Wow. Why don't you Moorish Americans teach this? Why don't y'all teach that the Moors were buying slaves? Why don't y'all teach that the Moors participated in the enslavement of Africans? It was impossible for the Mauros to vanquish the Malinke and fortify their reduction to slavery. Yes, this they could not have done themselves. If you see in Morocco country, and even Soso, where Malinke people still live today, they are there because of the enslavement of the Malinkes by the Moors and the Mauros. As you can see, once again, the Moors were enslaving other Africans. They partook in the slave trade. And you guys, you Moorish Americans, want to say that you descend from these people. Well, if you descend from these people, why don't you teach this stuff? Why don't you teach that the Moors participated in buying and selling slaves? They are there because of the enslavement of the Malinkes by the Moors and the Mauros. Bakari Samuano explains that slavery was not openly discussed with the public because the Atlantic slave trade was not simply a matter of European slavers stampeding the banks and whisking away Africans. African chiefs, African kings, chiefs, warlords, slavers controlled the trade on the continent and supplied the majority of the captives to European slave merchants. So this is pretty much saying that other Africans helped enslave Africans and sold them to the Europeans. And one of those African groups that helped do that were the Moors. We just saw it. I just showed you the Moors enslaved the Malinkes. Like, this is crazy. So, Moorish Americans, you guys helped enslave other Africans. Are you proud of that? Why don't you teach that? Why don't you teach your real history? The gist of the secret history Camisoko exposed was that Mali's formation was the ultimate outcome of the conflict over slavery. Rather than being portrayed a senseless tyrant as he usually appears in the epic narratives, Samingaru Kente is re-envisioned as an innovator of an anti-slavery movement who asked the other Mandi kingdoms to made war on the Soninke and Moorish slave traders and put an end to the odious trafficking of human flesh. Now, you see, it's saying that this guy, Samangaru Kente, he helped an anti-slave movement to go to war against other African groups that were enslaving Africans. Now, those African groups that he went to war with were the Soninke and the Moorish slave traders. You Moors are you're traitors to your race. You Moors help enslave other African people. How could you be proud of that? I guess maybe you're not proud of it, and that's why you guys don't teach this history, but it's here. Moorish slave traders. I would like to see what you Moorish Americans have to say about this. Timbuktu and Djenné reached a peak of intellectual and religious activity under the Aski dynasty and declined with the sacking of Songhai by the Moroccans in 1591. Now we know the Moroccans are the Moors. So once again, we see the pattern. The Moors are running around Africa. They're destroying dynasties and empires. They're traitors to their own race. They're participating in the slave trade. Yet Moorish Americans have no problem with saying, hey, yes, I'm a Moor. This is utterly ridiculous because you guys do not teach this. You don't teach it. So I guess you're ashamed of this. But if you claiming that you're descendant of these people, you have to embrace the history. Now, part of the reason why Moorish Americans want to claim to be Moors is because they know about the history of the Moors that went and invaded Spain in 711. Now, they love that history. It makes them feel good. It makes them feel that they weren't just a submissive people. They went and conquered. So they want to attach themselves to that history. Now, those Moors that invaded Spain and ruled Spain for 700 years, they built this mosque, the Alhambra. This is one of the biggest mosques that they built. This is in Al-Andalus. The Alhambra is a famous red palace built by the Moors in Granada in the 14th century. Its coat of lions is particularly impressive. See, as you can see, the Moors built this. This is a big mosque that the Moors built. It's part of the reason why Moorish Americans want to connect themselves to Moors, because they know that they have a history over there in Spain. They want to connect themselves to it. They want to disconnect themselves from the transatlantic slave trade and the slavery that was taking place over there, because that doesn't look real good. It makes, the Africans look like, they were not as intelligent as the Europeans that came in and enslaved them. But as you can see, those Europeans had help with enslaving the Africans. And their help was the Soninke and the Moors. The Soninke and the Moors helped the Europeans gather up Africans and ship them over to the New World. Now, this Alhambra, the Moors that built this, they left depictions of themselves in the building. So we can see what these Moors that built this Alhambra look like. And this is them. These are the Moors that built the Alhambra. These are 10 kings. These are 10 kings from caliphates that built the Alhambra. These are the Moors that were ruling Spain at the time. So my question to Moorish Americans are, do these Moors that you want to connect yourself to, these Moors that invaded and ruled Spain, these same Moors that built this building, the Alhambra, do these Moors look like you, Moorish Americans? Do they look like you? Be honest with yourselves. Be honest with yourselves. Do they look like you? Do you look like you share the same ethnicity and culture with these people right here? Do you look like you share the same ethnicity and culture with those people?